Mountain Standard Time. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matthew Denetkel. I work for the Intertribal Agriculture Council as the Technical Assistant Specialist for the Navajo region. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And of course, our hearts are absolutely full as can be with each and every single one of you joining us, not just for the 2020 IC Annual Conference, but for this session as well. I want to introduce our special guest presenter here today. Joining me here is Leah Biondo, and Leah manages the day-to-day operations for Western Skies Strategies in Washington, D.C. With clients like the United States Cattlemen's Association, the Society for Range Management, and the Rural and Agriculture Council for America. Her and the team at the WSS helps associations and individuals successfully navigate Capitol Hill. She's contributed to pieces that have been spotlighted by CNBC, The Washington Post, the BBC, RFD TV, and the National Institute for Lobbying and Ethics. So without any further ado, Leah, take it away.
Excellent. And I'm going to share my screen here. We've got a presentation for you all today. So let me get that. All right, we're screen sharing, we're live here. Again, thank you, Matthew, for the introduction there today. I'll be presenting how to be an effective agent for change. This is a little bit different than some of the other sessions you've been tuning into today. We're going to be talking about mostly Capitol Hill, mostly Washington, D.C., how to influence things that are happening there within the Capitol. So again, my name is Leah Biondo. I'm here with Western Skies Strategies, but on behalf of several of our great clients, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, Society for Range Management, and the Rural and Agriculture Council of America. And I know, the Intertribal Agriculture Council, we've been such a great partner over the years with all of those organizations. So just cannot thank the IAC enough for the support and the partnership on so many different items, which we'll probably discuss more today. So what's on today's agenda? We're going to be talking about crafting the narrative, storytelling, and how to tell your best story. We're going to go through the difference between lobbying and advocacy, which is important when you start getting into that work. We'll talk about the 3 avenues to create change, and then we'll go into your role in this process. And of course, at the end, we'll leave some time for any questions and answers. So I have been told we have a hard stop at the top of the hour. So we'll try to get through this as best as we can. I'm going to pause here. This is one of my favorite quote, graphics, memes, whatever you want to call it. It just illustrates that politics, policymaking, decision-making, it's for everyone. It impacts everybody. You can't tune out of some of the things that are happening in Washington, D.C., even though, believe me, some days you want to. The decisions that are being made in the Capitol, in Congress, and within the White House are ones that are going to affect and impact you in your everyday life. So you can either sit on the sidelines and kind of just be impacted by that, or you can make an impact and jump into those decision-making processes. So let's talk first about storytelling, because this is really the main thing that you all are here for. And the most effective storytelling that you have, of course, is the one where you tell your personal story. We're going to go through a little bit of an overview of how I approach an issue that we've received or an issue that we're working on and kind of craft that narrative. But keep in mind, the most effective story is the one where you tell your story, your personal struggles, your personal examples. The people on Capitol Hill are sometimes far removed from those everyday life decisions that you're making in your operation and at your home, home base, I guess. So as we get into this more official way to craft the narrative here, this is, of course, taught in poli-sci classes across the U.S. When you look at how do you define a story, how do you create a story, and if you've taken, any English class, these are all components of a story, but how does that apply to policy making and policy storytelling? So when you're looking at that, process or protocol, first of all, you've got to set the stage for your story. And What that means is what information does the audience first need to know to understand that story? That's where you're going to provide your background information here. You're going to give the audience, in this case, your audience are the policymakers, whether that's staff, congressional staff, whether that's members of Congress, whether that's the president or any of the president's representatives, whether that's state legislatures or governors. Your audience is the person who has the ability to make change. And so you're going to be crafting your story around that person and their experiences. And when you are setting the stage for your problem or what action you want that policymaker to take, you're going to consider what information do they need to know. For the most part, if you are walking into a members of Congress office and you are interacting with their agricultural and natural resources staff, those people usually have a good understanding of some of the issues that you might be working on. Whereas if you walk into, the White House and you're meeting with a member of the senior leadership team, they maybe don't know so much about the food supply chain or the food supply system, and you might have to educate them a little bit more. So when you set that stage, you're going to be considering your audience, what they know, what they need to know when you're talking about your problem, and just provide all of that background information kind of first off. Then you're going to go into establishing the plot when you're crafting this policy narrative. What is the problem that needs to be solved? So you're going to talk more, and this is where you put as much personal examples and personal stories as you can, because you've got to illustrate that problem that needs solving within this policy narrative. Then we go over, of course, to casting the characters. And again, like I said, this will probably be familiar if you've taken any standard, high school English or literature class. You're casting those characters. Who will this policy benefit? What other stakeholders are involved in this decision? And who might be against this policy? And you want to be a real straight shooter in these instances. You should be mentioning people who might be against the policy change you're seeking, because it gives you an opportunity to provide a rebuttal to some of their most common attacks on your policy or your change that you're seeking. And we'll do an example in a minute, but you want to provide all of that information. Who are your members? Who are you representing? And then who might be against what you're looking for? And that just provides a more complete picture for whichever policymaker that you're talking to, and allows them all the information that they need to make their decision and help you with your problem. Finally, of course, is that take-home message. That good policy narrative always culminates with something to be done. And this happens in any communication strategy, but especially so in a policy narrative. You need a call to action, and that call to action is most often a specific ask. You should be asking them for their support of a piece of legislation or their help in drafting a piece of legislation. Or maybe it's more of a casework issue and you just need them to make a call on your behalf. You need that call to action at the end there and letting them know what needs to be done. So following this 4-step process here, like I said before, one of our major clients is the United States Cattlemen's Association. And so earlier this year, the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19, really exposed some of the inherent flaws that we have in our corporate meatpacking industry. You saw meat processing plants in, several of the large international meat processing plants slow down, some even closed. You had fat cattle stacking up in pens across the US. It really bottlenecked the industry as you had the same amount of supply and you had increasing demand, but you couldn't quite get the cattle through the system so that you could line the shelves of the grocery store with meat. And this obviously was a problem. You want to ensure a safe, sustainable food supply. And so when we went to Congress, our members include some of the independent meat processors in this country as well. So you've got regional, local, state meat processors who are also members of the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, and they were looking for some regulatory relief from some of the barriers that keep them down, that keep them from experiencing the greatest market opportunities that they possibly can. So, we went, when we craft this narrative, we set the stage on how COVID-19 exposed some of those inherent flaws. We established the plot saying that we need those additional market opportunities for independent meat processing facilities. And then we cast the characters. And this one's relatively easy. You've got only 4 companies that process over 80% of the cattle in this country: JBS, Tyson Foods, Cargill, and National. And for the most part, they are going to be lobbying against the measures that we would like to see, because it increases competition for them in the marketplace. And from the U.S. cattlemen's perspective, more competitors are needed in that marketplace to offer producers and consumers additional options, especially those in the independent side of things. So our end goal, or our take-home message, the moral of the story, was that we really needed to reduce some of these regulatory burdens that hamper the ability of local and independent meat processors to compete in the marketplace. And we had several pieces of legislation that would do just that, but one of our most important was the New Markets for State Inspected Meat and Poultry Act, which would allow state inspected facilities to ship their product across state lines. Super important if you are a processor in a border town, and maybe you've got a market right next door, like maybe Denver's right next door to you, and you'd like to sell, or you're in Wyoming and you'd like to sell your beef to residents of Denver and create greater market access opportunities. So this was just an example, but as you're thinking about your problem that you have in your community, things that you'd like to see solved, a story that you would like to bring to decision makers, think about how you craft that narrative, because that is going to be critical in whether or not you're successful in getting your change or your policy accomplished. And just a reminder, please feel free to drop questions in the chat box. We're also going to be utilizing the chat feature for a few pop quizzes throughout here. So if you're participating, I didn't want this to just be me talking at you. I really wanted a back and forth conversation with folks who are tuning in. So utilize that chat feature, please. Okay, you have your story, you have your problem, you have your story. You're ready to get involved, whatever that means. There's an important distinction here between advocacy and lobbying. And I just wanted to briefly touch on it because it's super important if you're coming to Capitol Hill from a nonprofit organization. There's certain tax laws, tax requirements on how you approach influencing policy or influencing change. Advocacy is more of a broad and general term. It's telling your story, it's providing general information, it's sharing your expertise, whereas lobbying is more narrow, specific. You're asking for a specific action a legislator should take on a specific piece of legislation. So it's much more narrow, it's much more specific. And if you are lobbying, you should have a certain tax status so that you can maintain that nonprofit tax status. If you are a 501c3, like the Society for Range Management, you are going to be more providing expertise, sharing the knowledge that you already have, and telling your story. Whereas U.S. Cattlemen's Association is a nonprofit tax status of 501c6, they can engage in lobbying and actually a federally registered lobbyist on their behalf. So a lot of different rules and regulations when you start diving into it, and it's just important to know that distinction for when you start communicating with your decision makers. And now for really the meat of the matter, and I'm very excited for this. This is my favorite part to educate anybody on, especially those who sought out today's presentation and would like to be an effective agent for change. So we've got 3 different avenues to create change legislatively, of course, or policy-wise, of course. Those 3 avenues are through the legislature. That's Congress, that's the House, that's the Senate. Another way to create change through the administration, through the White House, through federal agencies. And then finally, we have judicially, which is the Supreme Court, the district courts, anywhere that you can present a case to a panel of judges, or maybe just one judge, depending on which one you go to. But 3 main avenues to create change when it comes to policy making and policy setting. So what are the opportunities within Congress to make change? There's really 3 main ways to do this that I've broken it down here for you. You have standalone legislation, you have the appropriations process, and you have a major piece of legislation like the Farm Bill. I'm using the Farm Bill as an example here, but there are plenty of other examples of this. The Water Resources Development Act might be another one. The Surface and Highway Transportation Act might be another one. Any of these major pieces of legislation that happen every 5 years or so, there's an opportunity there. So again, just using the Farm Bill as an example, but let's go back to legislation first. That's kind of your first stop, your first gateway into making change happen. You're going to be looking at legislation. You're going to be looking at either a standalone bill or an amendment process. I would say this avenue has the lowest barrier for entry. So you as an individual could reach out to your member of Congress and ask them to introduce a bill to help solve a problem in your community. That's something that you as an individual could do without much help, without much funding or resources, without much expertise. I would say that that has one of the lowest barriers of entry to make change. This piece of legislation can either be through a standalone bill, which would need to be attached to something bigger. It's very rare that you have individual bills going very far in Congress, just because there's so many different bills that get introduced each year. Or you're going to go through the amendment process. And again, that's when you see a larger bill moving forward and you'd like to attach your legislation or your policy onto that. I will say one of the challenges of individual legislation is it needs to be bipartisan, especially with as polarized political atmosphere as we have here in DC right now. You need your policy to be bipartisan, and whether that means you have to make some compromises or include some different language to appeal to both sides, it's just something to think about when you are drafting that policy. You also need a dedicated group of stakeholders. You need your champions, both in Congress and on your side. You need a group of folks who are going to help you push this forward. And that could just be, you and a group of friends, or you in the Intertribal Agriculture Council. But you really do need as many folks as possible, especially in many different areas of the country, or at least a dedicated cohort within your own region or own locality. Another way that you can pursue these opportunities within Congress is the appropriations process. Great thing about this is it happens every single year. Sometimes that means it's unpredictable though, and it's highly susceptible to partisan politics. If you have a vast majority in one chamber, like the House has in the past 2 years, you're going to see more partisan policies come out of that chamber. So the appropriations process can be a very useful avenue, also because you can sneak things in there that maybe you wouldn't be able to in a piece of legislation. And those little snuck in bits are called riders, and they're offered as amendments to an appropriations bill, but they're formally referred to as riders on an appropriations package. And that's because they're hitching a ride to be formally approved. But there's also an important distinction to be made here on authorizations versus appropriations. Never let your congressperson settle on just appropriations. You also need to get that appropriation authorized. So, first you have an authorization where a set or a price tag is attached to your policy, but then you need to get it funded. So if you're working with a member of Congress who got something included for you in the appropriations package, follow up with them. Make sure that you get it funded afterwards if there's a monetary component attached here. A good example of this was with the U.S. Cattlemen's Association. Again, in 2017, we were able to attach an exemption of the electronic logging devices mandate for livestock haulers on the appropriations package. That exemption's been in place since 2017. Every year we do have to do outreach and work to get it included again, but because it was a rider and it just kind of slipped in there, it's often that it's not going to be touched again unless you have some big opposition to it. But that's an example of how we've affected change through the appropriations process. Finally, the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill and other large pieces of legislation that happen every 5 years. The current Farm Bill expires in 2023. That means we're already going to be starting to talk about the Farm Bill again next year. You're going to hear plenty of listening sessions, plenty of commentary, plenty of opinions on what should be included and what shouldn't. But the Farm Bill, as it stands, it's a massive piece of legislation, as these massive pieces of legislation are. It has a price tag of $428 billion over the course of its 5-year lifetime. Within that Farm Bill, and these percentages are important to note just as you start to look at the change that you want to affect within the Farm Bill. Most of that bill accounts for nutrition policy. So about 76% of that bill accounts for nutrition programs, nutrition policies. Crop insurance is the second largest piece at 9%, which is incredible to think about, that it goes nutrition at 76, drops all the way down to 9% for crop insurance. Commodities programs are at 7%, conservation ties at 7%, and then you have 1% of the funding goes to everything else: horticulture, forestry, rural development, livestock, and mostly everything else. Okay, so we have a case study here, another example for you. So if you're not familiar with the Wild Horse and Burro program or the issues with the Wild Horse and Burro program, I'll give you a very short overview. We have far too many wild horses and burros on public lands. I believe we almost have 3 or 4 times the amount now. It doubles every 4 years. And what this does is it degrades rangelands, it degrades riparian areas. It's just simply an ecological disaster. And we really need to get these horses, these excess horses, off the areas where the land cannot support them anymore. It's an issue I've been working on since I came into this position, so since 2015. And we really, for the first few years, didn't see much movement because we kept pushing up against opposition, pushing up against opposition, pushing up against opposition. And so we couldn't get anywhere. And so finally, last year, we said, you know what, we really need to collaborate with our opposition. And this got us pretty far. We collaborated with a very diverse coalition of stakeholders. We went everywhere from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association to the Humane Society of the US, to the American Farm Bureau Federation, to the ASPCA. We had animal rights activists and livestock producer, small government interests in the same room, not small government, local government interests in the same room. A few county commissioner associations joined that coalition as well. And we knew that if we were going to make change happen, we needed to get together to solve the problem. And we were wildly successful. And we targeted the appropriations process, and we were able to secure an additional $21 million for the Wild Horse and Burro program. Last year, they had their strongest wild horse adoption year with over 6,000 animals sold or adopted. In their average year, they're only going to be selling or adopting close to 3,500 animals. So, they more than doubled the animals they were able to place in an adoption or a new home. We also had a record 10,000 horses removed from the range. So we helped to free up some of those ecological resources, especially in areas like Nevada, where the land just simply cannot support the amount of horses that it was being asked to support. So I just wanted to provide this as an example of what happens when you really do think strategically about how you want to make change. And it still remains, because we went through the appropriations process every year, it's still going to be a fight. We would love to get a more permanent solution, but because we have such a great set of partners, it's made it so much easier to help out in this instance, and in order to get healthy horses on healthy rangelands. So we have a pop quiz, so I can take a breath too, and you guys can take a break from listening to me. So you're going to go into your chat feature and just give me your best guesses to the following questions. How many members are there in the House and in the Senate?
All right, everybody, just go right into your Q&A feature and leave your answers.
And we might keep rolling. We've got a few more questions here, so I'm going to let you guys leave your answers in there, and then at the end I'll answer them, and we'll see who's able to be who got it right. So our next question here: nutrition accounts for the largest portion of the Farm Bill. Which is the second largest? Which committees in the Senate and the House handle legislation or have jurisdiction specific to American Indian, Native Hawaiian, and Alaskan Native peoples? So there's 2 committees. And your bonus is who serves as the leaders of those committees. So this is more of an accountability pop quiz. I want everyone to really be thinking about who your leaders are in these legislative bodies. Gonna wait just a few more minutes or a few more seconds, sorry.
Well, we do have plenty of answers coming in.
Oh, good.
Yeah, certainly do.
Perfect. I'll take a drink real quick.
All right, so some of the answers coming in, 435 and 100, 435 and 50. Someone has Senate 100. Someone here says 438 House and 2 times 50 plus territories for the Senate.
You guys are spot on, man. This was supposed to stump you. No, we have 435 members in the House and 100 in the Senate. So great job.
I fully agree. Here's another answer that came in. It says crop insurance is the 2nd largest portion of the Farm Bill at 9%.
You guys nailed it. You're nailing it. Yep, crop insurance is that 2nd largest portion.
Perfect.
How about any answers on the committees? This one's a little bit tougher.
I am not seeing any answers on the committees just yet.
Dum-dum.
Maybe.
All right. So in the Senate, we have the Committee on Indian Affairs, and the 2 leaders of that, Senator John Hoeven of North Dakota and Senator Tom Udall. So again, that's the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. In the House, unfortunately, it's just a subcommittee, but it's the Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples, and you have your chair there. Just a minute here, because I want to get this right for you guys. So your subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States, and your committee chair is Ruben Gallego from Arizona, and your ranking member is Paul Cook from California. So apologies for switching on you, but we had to get that right. So great job, everyone. You guys did really good. We're gonna have at least one more pop quiz here. But I'm proud of us already starting pretty well off.
Absolutely. Great job.
Great job, everybody. Okay, let's jump into the next avenue for change. We have the administration, and this includes the White House and 15 federal agencies. So in the White House, you have what's called the Executive Office of the President. This includes several different councils and other bodies that provide direct recommendations to the president. The ones that you might be most familiar with, the Council on Environmental Quality and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Of course, there's plenty more, but these are some of the ones that at least I've had to interact with directly, and so you might have to as well. On the federal agency side, this includes, again, 15 federal agencies, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of the Interior being 2 of those big of those larger ones that, you know, in our world that we would work with. And of course, there I am with Secretary Sonny Perdue and kind of his first year being selected to serve. We had given him a nice tie with some cow-calf pairs on it, just so that he can remember the independent producer. The regulatory map, and of course this is way too small for you all to, you know, dive in here, but I wanted it just to illustrate the complex nature of rulemaking. As you can see here, there's so many different steps, there's so many different sub-steps. I would say that taking the regulatory route or taking the administrative route to make change is going to be a little bit higher barrier of entry, because you're going to need to either consult or hire somebody who understands how these rulemakings happen. Of course, there are opportunities for individuals to be involved in the rulemaking process, and it's right there at step 6, public comments. Public comments are so important. I know the Intertribal Agriculture Council, I know the Society for Range Management, almost any professional organization that you're a part of is going to ask you to submit public comments at some point. Why are these important? Because the agency takes exactly what's written into them and turns it into some sort of policy or decision-making process. So if you have a huge problem with the way that a rule is coming out or will be implemented, this is your opportunity to state that. And I want to make a plug here. You often see a lot of form comments. So maybe, you know, an organization wants you to copy and paste a set of comments and just slap your name on it. Those are not going to be as effective as if you sat down and submitted your own thoughtful comments that, you know, relate directly to problems and examples from your life. So as much as you can, avoid copying and pasting, you know, a boilerplate comment form in this process, because the agency wants to hear from you and wants to hear specific examples of how this rule that's coming up down the pipeline or this rule that's being proposed, how it's going to impact you and your community, your operation, you as an individual. This is the part where the public can get involved. But you see, there are so many different processes involved in the rulemaking procedure. Next up, we have the Federal Register. And I just wanted to highlight this slide because this is the, as what it's referred to, the daily journal of the US government. And as a lobbyist, it's my job every day to actually read what's in here and see if it impacts any of our clients. So this is where you're going to submit your comments. This is where you're going to see which comments are coming down the pipeline. This is where you're going to see where your rulemaking is in the process. It's really just like your one-stop shop for all things related to federal rulemaking. And it includes so many different things that are happening each day. You can see this was just from Monday. We had in that one day, 100 documents from 46 agencies. We had 81 notices, 8 proposed rules, 12 rules, and you can see all of these other special filings and regular filings that are happening. So there's a lot going on every single day. If you start here, you're going to be in a good spot. Another case study. So this was a way that we utilize the administrative process, or a way that we are still utilizing the administrative process to affect change. And I'm sure that I don't have to explain the rural broadband issue to anybody who's tuning in here today, but explaining it to folks who have spent most of their life in an urban area, who've spent most of their life not having to drive down to the local McDonald's to do their homework or to do their schoolwork. It's a little bit more difficult, and you really do have to revert back to that narrative, that policy narrative, that storytelling that we talked about in the beginning. So what we've done over the years, and this has been many, many years, and I imagine we have many, many more years until you know, you in your home can experience faster, more reliable broadband connections. But we're making progress, and we're making progress because we have leaders like Zach Duchenel, executive director of the IAC, who's been willing to travel to Washington so many different times to explain the issues at hand. And in this picture here, he's actually in the Federal Communications Commission's downtown office. We've held multiple broadband fly-ins to bring leaders in from all across the US to talk about how these issues impact them directly. You know, I was just hearing a story the other day, with the pandemic, rural communities are being left behind because it's so much harder to do virtual learning when you barely have a broadband connection. And there's actually a story from a gal who was out somewhere in Montana, I think, where the buses were making reverse trips to drop off homework each day because it was so difficult for these students to log on and get reliable broadband access. So again, telling your story, telling your personal story is going to make all the difference. On the right there, you see my boss, Jess Peterson, in the background. He actually took FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr out on his ranch in Montana, out on his leased ground, to show him exactly what he means by, you know, some parts of his land he's getting great service, other parts he's not. And it helped the commissioner really understand that we needed to update some of those broadband coverage maps so that, we can't manage what we can't measure. If we don't know where we're getting service and we don't know where we aren't getting service, it's going to be very hard to get service where we don't get it, and so on and so forth. But what were some of the tactics employed here? As I mentioned, the storytelling, connecting those broad policy goals to specific moments in everyday life. And the more specific, the better. You cannot get more specific. These folks want to hear your story and your examples. In the previous photo, that FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr might be the only FCC commissioner ever to attend a livestock sale. And it was because he wanted to see exactly how video auctions work, and have that example so that when he's sitting before Congress and when he's sitting before the President of the United States, he can share a very specific example for how increasing faster, more reliable broadband is going to benefit rural America. We also met with both high-level officials and their policy staff. So we went right to the top with the FCC commissioner, but in the photo with Zach, we were sitting there right with the commissioner's policy staff. And I've heard from a lot of people who come to DC that they didn't know that DC was run by so many 20-something-year-olds. And as disenchanting as that might be when you first come out here, these policy staff are the ones that are making things happen. They're the ones that are coordinating, collaborating, drafting legislation, reaching out to other offices. So you've got to really meet with, of course, those high-level officials, but then also the staff. The staff are the ones that are going to be the workhorses. They're the ones that can make change and make it happen. This third bullet point here might have a little bit of a sour taste if you're reading it and I'm not explaining it, but this is because I see so many folks commenting or calling me or texting me and saying, why in the world did we offer praise for that? Why did we issue a statement praising that move when it wasn't everything that we wanted? We're always telling the FCC they're doing a great job and they're moving in the right direction because we want them to keep moving in that direction. So we issue public statements of support anytime that a change happens that's putting us closer to our end goal. And one of the quotes that I put there is, maybe it's not the best possible outcome, but it was the best outcome possible at the time. And so building on those incremental changes eventually is going to get us to our end goal. And so anytime you can say thank you to members of Congress, say thank you to congressional staff, say thank you to those elected officials or those appointed officials, that's going to go so much farther in them continuing to want to help you with your issue. So again, as I said, some of the successes that we had in the broadband space, just to illustrate how this worked, we ended up getting a 5G Rural Fund for America. The FCC established this. It's going to disperse up to $9 billion with $680 million reserved for tribal lands for broadband deployment. So that's a big chunk of change. We also established the Precision Ag Connectivity Task Force. And this task force is going to work directly with the FCC to provide recommendations on how to advance deployment of broadband, especially in those underserved agriculture spaces. And we do have two client members who are a part of that task force. So you can see those successes when we use some of these tactics over here. So pop quiz, let's see. As we're talking about administrative avenues of change, let's go through a quick little pop quiz here. Name 3 of the 15 federal agencies. And I might have cheated and gave you 2, but if you can think of a third one, drop it in that chat feature down below. Or to the right of where you're seeing this video. Ooh, I didn't even mention this one, but how many days do you typically have to submit comments on a proposed rulemaking? This is really going to help you plan your time when I talked about that public comment feature. And which website houses the Daily Journal of the U.S. government? We did cover that one. Take another sip of water here while we wait for some answers.
And I'll tell you what, Lee, I'll even up the stakes here and say The first person to answer all three correctly, state your name, where you're from with all three answers, and if they're all correct, we'll throw in an IAC jacket.
Oh my goodness, nobody thought they were gonna win a prize here for just tuning in.
Yep.
That number 2 question is gonna be tough too. We'll see.
We'll make it happen. State your name, where you're from, and all three answers. And they all have to be correct.
They all have to be. That's the important part, yeah.
That's the important part. We can't be an effective agent for change if we don't know these three answers.
True, it's true. Let's see. Any comments coming in?
We do. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
I'm
6.
so proud of you all. Thanks
Yeah.
for participating. And I hope this helps break it up a little bit. I know what it's like to just be on the other end and just someone's chatting at you.
Yeah. Okay, so I believe these are all single answers at the moment, but we have an answer here, 60 or 90 days. I believe that pertains to question 2. I see NRCS, FSA, RD, which is, all of our USDA agencies there. Then we have Agriculture, Interior, and Commerce, AKA U.S. Department of. Then I see a 90, and I see Federal Register once, and I see Federal Register twice.
Oh, you guys got to get clicking. You need all 3.
Yeah, we need all 3. But until then, let's just keep it rolling.
Sounds good. Yes, because we are at the back half of the presentation now. So
We are.
3 of 15 federal agencies. The individual who said USDA, Interior, and Commerce is correct. Those are the large federal agencies. When you're talking FSA and RMA, you're talking about the sub-agencies within a greater department. So I'm not too correct there, but how many days do you typically have to submit comments? You're spot on, 60 to 90 days, which is not a large window when you have to review the regulation and also live your normal everyday life. And then finally, which website houses the Daily Journal? The Federal Register. So we did have some correct answers. Very proud of you all. We're moving on now to the Judicial Branch. And I'm going to be up front.
I do have one. Yep, I do have one here.
Woo!
All right, Tracy Roblard from Palmer, Alaska. Number 1, Agriculture, Commerce, and Interior. The comment period is 90 days, and the Federal Register, the answer for the website.
All right, Tracy from Alaska. Great job, great job.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so the Judicial Branch, and I'm going to be upfront and honest. This is one that I don't personally have as much experience working with. I'm not a lawyer, I don't work for a law firm, but it is one avenue to affect change. And when we're talking about the Judicial Branch, we have 3 different parts here. The Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land, of course. You have 9 justices with lifetime appointments. You have the U.S. District Courts, 94 of those actually, those tri-federal cases. And then the Court of Appeals. So maybe you didn't like what your case was decided as. You're going to go to one of those 13 Court of Appeals. And a case study here. Again, I mentioned that it's an effective avenue for change because it has been wildly successful for many different Native American or Indigenous peoples cases, as is this one, McGirt versus Oklahoma, which happened in July 2020 when the Supreme Court ruled that the eastern part of Oklahoma remains as Native American land since that land was never dissolved by Congress. And you have a quote there from the Cherokee Nation principle. Huge win for the folks in Oklahoma, huge way to affect change, huge avenue here. And it's important to note that for the most part, any decisions made by the Judicial Branch are going to be fairly permanent. It sets a precedent for future cases. And unless a big enough case is built against it, most of the time those decisions are going to be permanent. So extraordinarily effective way to make change. It also has the highest barrier of entry. It's very difficult as an individual to have your own personal case tried or your own community's case tried on your own. You're going to need to hire some folks to help you along the way. and you're generally going to need a good pot of funding to help get you there. So highly effective, high barrier of entry there. Just in the interest of time, so we leave some time for questions, but I would love to hear your answer. Drop in the chat feature how you've engaged in the policymaking process in the past. We won't go through them on here, but I would love to read them later. So make sure you drop some of your personal examples in the chat feature. But how are we going to get even more involved? What's our take-home message from today? Number one, the best way to affect change is to be part of a larger organization that represents your values and beliefs. So you're going to have to do some research here. You're already going in the right direction because the Intertribal Agriculture Council is such a great place to start. But if there are other ways, other places, other parts of your life that you want to affect change in, seek out larger organizations because we have a bigger voice that way. Number two, and I personally, this is my wish for all of you, is to build relationships with your members of Congress. It makes my job so much easier when I walk into a member of Congress office and they've already heard about the issue that I'm presenting, and they've already heard from especially their constituents about it. So build your relationships with the members of Congress in your state. So that includes both of your senators and your representative. It's so important, and these people want to hear from you, especially if you're going to serve as a resource, especially if you are going to offer your technical expertise and knowledge on an issue, because these policy staff, they have so much in their portfolios, it's impossible for them to be an expert on every single thing that comes across their desk. They're going to be so appreciative if you offer yourself as a resource. If you offer tours of maybe you have a ranch, or maybe you have a processing facility that you would want them to come out and just tour and learn more about. They love those opportunities. It's a photographic moment for the senator or congressperson, and it's an opportunity for you to bend their ear on the issues that are impacting you. And of course, I don't care how you reach out to these members of Congress, whether it's the Capitol Hill switchboard, so you pick up the phone and you just tell them your zip code, they connect you right to your members of Congress. I don't care if you email them or snail mail them a letter, just building those relationships is so, so important, even when you're not asking for anything, because it's likely you'll be asking for something down the line. Number three, participate in the rulemaking process. And by this, I mean submit thoughtful public comments. Anytime that you can, and you have the specific knowledge or expertise, or there's an issue or a rulemaking that's going to impact you, submit a public comment. I can't tell you how often the agencies have been swayed because they've had so many different comments come in on an issue that they just, it would be impossible for them to do anything but reconsider whatever rulemaking that they were making. So important to participate in that rulemaking process. Just three more here. Stay current on news and find reliable publications, watch congressional hearings, and exercise caution when you're drawing your news from social media. This is more important than ever in today's day and age. But even if you are just subscribing yourself to a few different news sources and you're skimming headlines every day, stay as current as you can on news, especially in like trade publications. If agriculture is your area, stay up to date on what's going on through AgriPulse or DTN's Progressive Farmer. If natural resources is your avenue, check out High Country News or some of these other publications that are offering that. And of course, just exercise a little bit of caution when you're reading your news or getting your news from social media, but that can be an excellent way to get news too, because it's current, it's always happening. Number 5 is attend stakeholder meetings. Showing up is the first step, I think, is how the saying goes. This includes Washington, D.C. fly-ins, where you attend meetings in D.C. with your association or with a group of people, as well as meetings with your local, state, or tribal elected officials in your area. So even those more local meetings are important. It helps you build relationships with your elected officials, and it gives you another opportunity to tell your story. So showing up, attending, being there in person, maybe safely with COVID now, but even in those virtual settings, let folks get to know your face and your voice and some of the things that you care about. and I can't say this enough, get others involved. You guys are here because this is what you're interested in. Otherwise, you wouldn't have clicked on this video. But this is more fun. Advocacy, lobbying is more fun when you do it with other people. And, you know, of course, we're stronger together. We have a larger voice when we're all together. So get others involved. If we go back to that very first slide, you may not be into politics, but everybody else around you is. And so you might as well jump in rather than sit on the sidelines. This is my last screen, so get ready for your questions and answers. One of my favorite quotes, and it's so true, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So know your power, know your voice. I hope you were able to pick up some tips, tricks, hints, things that your lobbyist doesn't want you to know on today's presentation. And I really do look forward to reading some of your comments in the chat feature once we get off from this video here today. But Matthew, any questions that have popped up?
Yeah, get ready. Here we go.
Oh boy.
All right. How would you rank the following in terms of efficacy? Number one, reaching out to your local representative of congressional delegations. Number two, calling the DC office of the delegations. Number three, emailing the delegation. And number four, writing an old-fashioned letter.
Oh, this one's easy. They're all equally effective, believe it or not. Each office takes every piece of communication that comes into the office and tallies it up. So let's say you have someone who wrote a letter on wild horses, somebody who made a phone call, and somebody who wrote a snail mail. Wild horses is going to get 3 points. There were 3 constituents that reached out on that letter, on that issue. And so it just depends. Whatever your personal preference is, if you're a phone person, pick up the phone. If you're an email person, write an email. If you're a snail mail person, I still am, so I'm not going to hate on it. Write a letter, but all 3 are as equally as effective. So don't feel held back by you have to do this or you have to do that.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Here's our next question. What is your advice on engaging senators and House reps on Twitter?
Oh, my advice, I guess I would say I would highly recommend it. Anytime you can @ a member of Congress gives you another voice. And I'd imagine that's another tick in that issue box. I don't know that for sure, but I do know that you have your communication staff monitoring the members' social media. And if an issue keeps popping up, they're going to take notice of that, especially because it's such a public platform and you have so many other people seeing that tweet. So as much as you can, tweet at them, get on their social media, their Facebooks, not just to bash them, maybe, you know, say thank you every once in a while too, if they've done something that's worth the thank you. But yes, absolutely. If you have, you know, a picture with them or you have something that you want to get their attention with, Twitter is a great platform to do that.
Okay, and that's it.
Okay, well, we made our timeline too, so that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just double, triple checking here. I don't see anything else coming in. So until then, Leah, thank you so much for volunteering all of your valuable time to be with us today. All the work that you do, in fact, for the agriculture industry and Indian country as a whole, it is certainly could not appreciate it enough.
Well, thank you for having me today. I'll be around. You can find my contact information. You can find me on social media. If you have any follow-up questions, please do reach out. Love hearing from you guys. Wish we were in Las Vegas this year, but this will have to do.
That makes 2 for me. Yep, absolutely. All right. Yeah, so I see 11:55. So at 2 o'clock, we will be reconvening in like a general session type of a room. So feel free to join us there. We will be kind of going over everything that we've experienced in the last couple of days in terms of all the sessions. So if you want to hear a brief summary and maybe pick out a couple that you would like to hear more about, please join us there. And don't forget at 4 o'clock Mountain Standard Time is the IAC storytelling event. It's the first event of its kind. Hear all the wonderful entries that we received, and of course those entries will be receiving prizes as well. Hear from our very distinct membership in terms of the panel members that we have, and that'll be tonight as well. And don't forget, tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time will be the IAC Board of Directors meeting. You are all more than welcome to attend that as well. And from there, that's going to wrap up this particular segment of the 2020 IAC Annual Conference and Membership Meeting.